The dashboard clock read 11:47 p.m. when I pulled into the Marriott parking lot, rain hammering my windshield like bullets. My wife Elise's BMW sat under a streetlight, water streaming down its pristine silver surface. She'd told me she was working late again, third time this week, but her phone's location showed she was here, not at the law firm. I'm Jack Callahan, and I run a hardware store in this godforsaken coastal Maine town. Not exactly the kind of guy who inspires fear or respect. Most people see me as the quiet husband of the brilliant attorney Elise Callahan, senior partner at Morrison & Associates. They're not wrong, but they're not entirely right either. 6 years in military logistics taught me to notice patterns, inconsistencies, things that don't add up. Like my wife's sudden need to work until midnight on cases that used to wrap up by 7. I sat in my truck, engine running, watching the hotel entrance through the rain. The smart move would be to drive home, pretend I never came here, keep living in whatever fantasy I'd been constructing about my marriage. But I've never been accused of being smart when it comes to the people I love. The hotel's automatic doors slid open, and my world collapsed. Elise stepped out first, laughing at something the man behind her had said. Her hair was mussed, her usually perfect lipstick gone. She looked relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in months. The man's hand rested on the small of her back as they walked toward the parking lot. And when she turned to face him, I saw who it was. My father, Charles Callahan, 63 years old, retired investment banker, and apparently my wife's lover. They stood between their cars, talking in low voices. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see the intimacy in their posture, the way she touched his arm, how he leaned down to whisper something that made her laugh again. This wasn't a business meeting that ran late. This was something that had been going on for a while. I pulled out my phone and started recording. They kissed. Not a friendly peck, but a real kiss. The kind that said they'd been doing this for months. Maybe longer. When they finally separated, I heard Elise's voice carry across the parking lot. I'm tired of pretending everything's fine with Jack. Maybe it's time someone else showed me what it's like to be with a man who has stronger nerves. My father chuckled. Jack's always been weak. Even as a kid, he never had the backbone to take what he wanted. Well, I know what I want now, Elise said, running her hand down his chest. I stopped recording and sat back in my seat, rain still pounding the roof above me. 22 years I'd known my father. 8 years I'd been married to Elise. And this was how I found out what they really thought of me. They got in their separate cars and drove away, leaving me alone in the parking lot, with the sound of rain and the taste of betrayal in my mouth. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I drove to Murphy's Tavern, down by the docks, a place where the lighting was dim and the bartender minded his own business. I ordered a whiskey and tried to process what I'd just witnessed. You look like someone pissed in your cornflakes, said a voice behind me. I turned to see Steve Mullins, my best friend since high school, sliding onto the bar stool next to mine. Steve owned the garage down the street from my hardware store, and he had a talent for showing up when I needed him most. Something like that, I said, taking another sip of whiskey. Want to talk about it? I considered telling him everything, but the words wouldn't come. Not yet. This was too fresh, too raw. Instead, I shook my head and finished my drink. Just having a rough night, Stevie. I'll be fine. He studied my face for a moment, then nodded. All right. But if you need anything, you know where to find me. After Steve left, I sat alone at the bar for another hour, thinking. Elise and my father thought I was weak, that I didn't have the backbone to take what I wanted. They were about to find out how wrong they were. And that was the moment I stopped being her husband and started being her reckoning. The next morning, I woke up alone. Elise had already left for work, her side of the bed cold and perfectly made. A note on the kitchen counter informed me she'd be working late again. I crumpled it up and threw it in the trash. I opened my laptop and started doing what I do best, organizing information and planning logistics. If Elise and my father wanted to play games, I needed to understand the rules first. I started with our finances. As Elise's husband, I had access to our joint accounts, but I'd never paid much attention to the details. She handled the money, and I ran the store. That was our arrangement. Now I wished I'd been more involved. Our checking account showed regular deposits from the law firm, but there were also several large withdrawals over the past 6 months. Cash withdrawals, always in round numbers. 500 here, 1,000 there. When I added them up, Elise had taken nearly $15,000 in cash from our joint account. I made copies of all the bank statements and started a file. Next, I called Tommy Brennan, a private investigator I'd met through the store. Tommy was an ex-cop who'd left the force after a back injury, and he specialized in matrimonial investigations. We'd become friendly over the years when he'd come in for supplies for his home renovation projects. "Jack, good to hear from you," Tommy said when he answered the phone. "What can I do for you?" "I need to hire you, Tommy. It's personal." There was a pause. "Your wife?" "Yeah. Can we meet somewhere private?" "Come by my office this afternoon. And Jack, bring cash." Tommy's office was in a strip mall between a nail salon and a sandwich shop. The waiting room was small and smelled like coffee and cigarettes. Tommy himself was a big man with graying hair and tired eyes who looked like he'd seen too much of the world's ugliness. I told him everything: the hotel, the recording, the cash withdrawals. Tommy listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. "How long do you think this has been going on?" he asked when I finished. "I don't know. Months, maybe longer. I feel like an idiot for not seeing it sooner." "Don't beat yourself up. People see what they want to see, especially in marriage. The question is, what do you want to do about it?" "I want evidence. Everything. Phone records, credit cards, hotel receipts. I want to know exactly what they've been doing and for how long." Tommy nodded. "That'll take time and money, and it might hurt to learn the details." "I can handle it." "All right. I'll need a retainer, $3,000 up front." I wrote him a check from my personal account, the one Elise didn't have access to. "How long?" "Give me 2 weeks. I'll have a preliminary report for you by then." While Tommy worked on gathering evidence, I started my own investigation. I knew both Elise and my father better than anyone, and I had advantages Tommy didn't. I started with Elise's car. She'd had a dash cam installed 6 months ago after a minor fender bender, but I'd noticed she never checked the recordings. The camera stored footage on an SD card that I could access from my laptop. The recordings were a goldmine. Hours of Elise talking on the phone while driving, often to someone she called Charlie. My father's name was Charles, but everyone called him Chuck. Charlie was what Elise called him in bed, apparently. "I can't keep doing this," I heard her say in one recording from 3 weeks ago. "Jack's getting suspicious. He asked me about working late again." "Don't worry about Jack," came my father's voice through the car speakers. "He's too weak to do anything about it, even if he finds out. Besides, once we get control of his inheritance, it won't matter what he thinks." My inheritance. My grandfather had left me a trust fund that I couldn't access until I turned 40. That was still 2 years away, but the fund was worth nearly $2 million. I'd never paid much attention to the details, because I'd always assumed Elise and I would access it together when the time came. Apparently, they had other plans. I spent the next week going through every recording on the dash cam. The picture that emerged was worse than I'd imagined. Elise and my father had been planning this for almost a year. They'd been meeting regularly, not just for sex, but to plan how they could get control of my money. The plan was elegant in its cruelty. They were going to have me declared mentally incompetent, with Elise as my guardian and my father as the trustee of my inheritance. They'd already consulted with a psychiatrist who specialized in competency evaluations, and they had a strategy for documenting my supposed mental decline. The cash withdrawals from our joint account weren't random. They were payments to people who would testify to my erratic behavior. The mailman who would say I'd been acting paranoid. The grocery store clerk who would claim I'd been talking to myself. Even Monica Lane, Elise's business partner and supposed best friend, who would testify that I'd been making inappropriate comments about other women. They'd been building a case against me for months, and I'd been completely oblivious. But now I knew, and knowledge, as they say, is power. I called Tommy and asked him to meet me at Murphy's Tavern that evening. When he arrived, I had a folder full of evidence waiting for him. "Jesus, Jack," he said after reviewing the dashcam recordings. "This is conspiracy to commit fraud. Maybe worse. Can we prove it in court?" "With this? Absolutely. But are you sure that's what you want to do? Once this comes out, there's no going back. Your marriage is over. Your relationship with your father is finished, and this whole town is going to know your business." I thought about that for a moment. Did I want my dirty laundry aired in court? Did I want to be the guy whose wife cheated with his own father? "No," I said finally. "I don't want to go to court. I want something better." "What do you mean?" "I want them to suffer the way they made me suffer. I want them humiliated, broke, and alone. And I want them to know it was me who did it to them." Tommy leaned back in his chair and studied my face. "That's a dangerous game, Jack. Revenge has a way of getting out of hand. So does betrayal. He was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. All right, what do you need from me? Everything you can find on both of them. Financial records, phone calls, emails, hotel receipts. I want to know every secret they have. That's going to cost more money. I don't care. I want them destroyed. Tommy gathered up the files and stood to leave. Be careful, Jack. When you set out for revenge, dig 2 graves. In this case, I said, I'll need 3. 2 weeks later, Tommy delivered his report. It was even worse than I'd expected. Elise and my father had been meeting at the Marriott twice a week for 8 months. They'd also taken 3 weekend trips together, telling me they were separate business conferences. The hotel receipts showed they'd stayed in the same room each time. But the financial information was what really caught my attention. My father had been moving money around, setting up shell companies and offshore accounts. He was preparing to disappear with my inheritance once they got control of it. More interesting was what Tommy had discovered about Monica Lane. Elise's business partner and best friend wasn't just a witness to my supposed mental decline. She was actively participating in the plan to steal my money. In exchange, she would receive a 20% cut of my inheritance. Monica was the weak link. She was greedy, gossipy, and not nearly as smart as she thought she was. If I could turn her against Elise and my father, I could destroy their entire plan. I called Monica and asked her to meet me for drinks at the Harbor View restaurant, an upscale place overlooking the water. I told her I was concerned about Elise and wanted to talk to someone who knew her well. Monica arrived wearing a designer dress and too much perfume. She'd always been the type of woman who tried too hard to be noticed, and she'd always resented that Elise was more successful and attractive than she was. Jack, how nice to see you, she said, sliding into the booth across from me. You sounded worried on the phone. Is everything all right with Elise? That's what I was hoping you could tell me, I said, signaling the waitress for another round. She's been working so much lately, and when she comes home she seems distant. I thought maybe you'd noticed something at the office. Monica's eyes lit up. She loved being the center of attention, especially when it involved other people's problems. Well, now that you mention it, she has been acting strange lately, more secretive than usual, and she's been taking a lot of personal calls. Personal calls? Yes, and she always steps out of the office to take them. Very hush-hush. Monica leaned forward conspiratorially. Between you and me, I think she might be having an affair. I did my best to look shocked. An affair? With who? I don't know for sure, but I've seen her getting into cars with men I don't recognize. Older men, well-dressed. You know the type. The waitress brought our drinks, and I made sure Monica's wine glass stayed full. After her 3rd glass, she was ready to tell me everything. Can I trust you with something, Jack? Something that might be hard to hear? Of course. I think Elise is planning to leave you. She's been asking me about divorce lawyers, about how to protect assets during a separation. She even asked me about having someone declared mentally incompetent. I let my face show the appropriate amount of shock and hurt. Mentally incompetent? Why would she ask about that? Monica reached across the table and patted my hand. I think she's trying to find a way to keep your inheritance for herself. She knows about your trust fund, right? Yes, but that's our money. We're married. Not if you're declared incompetent. Then she could control everything as your guardian. I pulled out my phone and pretended to be recording our conversation for my own protection. Monica, this is very serious. Are you saying my wife is trying to steal my inheritance? I'm saying she's been asking a lot of questions about how to do exactly that, and she's been meeting with people who could help her make it happen. What people? Monica hesitated, realizing she might have said too much, but the wine had loosened her tongue, and she couldn't stop herself. Your father, for one. They've been meeting regularly to discuss your situation. My father? What does he have to do with this? He's been helping her plan everything. He even suggested the psychiatrist she should use for the competency evaluation. I sat back in my chair, letting the full weight of the betrayal show on my face. My own father is helping my wife steal my inheritance? I'm sorry, Jack. I thought you should know. Is there anyone else involved? Monica looked uncomfortable. Well, I've been helping with some of the legal research, but only because Elise asked me to. I didn't know she was planning to actually go through with it. That was a lie, and we both knew it. But I nodded sympathetically. Monica, I need your help. If what you're saying is true, I need to protect myself. Can you get me copies of the documents they've been preparing? I don't know, Jack. That would be betraying Elise's trust. She's betraying my trust. She's betraying our marriage. Please, Monica. I need to know what I'm up against. Monica finished her wine and nodded. All right, I'll see what I can do. But you have to promise me that my name won't come up in any of this. I promise. 3 days later, Monica delivered a manila envelope to my store. Inside were copies of everything: the psychiatric evaluation request, the competency hearing paperwork, the financial documents my father had prepared, and a detailed timeline of their plan. They were planning to have me committed within the next month, but they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd trusted Monica Lane, and Monica Lane couldn't keep her mouth shut to save her life. I spent the weekend preparing my counterattack. By Monday morning, I was ready to destroy all three of them. I started with the money. Using the financial information Tommy had gathered, I was able to trace the shell companies my father had set up. More importantly, I discovered that he'd been embezzling money from his former clients to fund his new life with Elise. I made copies of everything and sent them anonymously to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Next, I dealt with Monica. I called her and told her I'd changed my mind about confronting Elise, that I wanted to work things out with my wife instead of fighting her. Monica was disappointed, but agreed to keep our conversation confidential. Then I called Elise's biggest client, a development company that was building a new shopping center outside town. I told them I had information about Monica Lane that they needed to know before signing their next contract with Morrison & Associates. The meeting was scheduled for Wednesday afternoon. On Wednesday morning, I drove to Elise's office and waited in the parking lot. At exactly 2:30 p.m., I watched Monica leave the building and drive away. She was going to meet with the development company's lawyers, expecting to discuss contract details. Instead, they were going to hear a recording of Monica admitting to conspiracy to commit fraud. While Monica was being fired, I walked into Morrison & Associates and asked to speak with Elise privately. "Jack, what are you doing here?" she asked, looking nervous. "I wanted to talk to you about our marriage. I know things have been difficult lately, and I want to make them better." She relaxed slightly. That's good to hear. I've been worried about you." "Have you?" "Because I've been worried about me too, especially after talking to Monica the other night." Elise's face went white. "What did Monica tell you?" "Everything. About the psychiatrist, about the competency hearing, about my father helping you plan it all." "Jack, I can explain." "No need. I understand perfectly. You think I'm weak, that I don't have the backbone to fight back. You're about to find out how wrong you are." I pulled out my phone and played the recording of Monica's confession. Elise listened in horror as her best friend detailed their entire plan. "You recorded Monica without her consent," Elise said when the recording ended. "That's illegal." "Maybe. But it's also evidence of your conspiracy to commit fraud." And speaking of evidence, I handed her a folder containing copies of all the hotel receipts, phone records, and financial documents Tommy had gathered. "Your boyfriend is about to be arrested for embezzlement. Monica just got fired and will probably be disbarred. And you're about to lose everything." Elise stared at the documents, her hands shaking. "What do you want?" "I want you out of my house by tonight. I want you to withdraw the competency petition, and I want you to stay away from my father. And if I don't, then I release everything to the media. Your affair, the fraud conspiracy, your father-in-law's embezzlement. How do you think that will affect your law practice?" Elise was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked up at me with pure hatred in her eyes. "You son of a bitch. You're not the man I married." "No," I said, standing to leave. "I'm better." That evening, I sat in my living room, waiting for Elise to come home. I'd changed the locks on the house, but I wanted to face her one more time before this was over. She arrived at 8:30 p.m., her key no longer working in the front door. She pounded on the door until I opened it. "Let me in, Jack. We need to talk. We can talk right here. The neighbors will hear." "Good, let them." Elise looked around nervously, then stepped closer to me. "Jack, please. I know you're angry, but we can work this out. What Monica told you, it wasn't what it sounded like." "Really?" "Because it sounded like you were planning to have me declared mentally incompetent so you could steal my inheritance with the help of my own father." "It wasn't like that. We were just exploring options in case your mental health declined. You've been acting paranoid lately, talking about people following you, checking my phone." "Because you were cheating on me." "I wasn't cheating. Your father and I were meeting to discuss how to help you." "Help me by having sex in hotel rooms?" Elise's face flushed. "I don't know what you think you saw, but I have video, Elise, and hotel receipts, and recordings of you talking about how weak I am, How I don't have the backbone to take what I want. She stared at me for a long moment. Then her expression changed. The fake concern disappeared, replaced by cold calculation. Fine. You want the truth? Yes, I was sleeping with your father. Yes, we were planning to get control of your money. And yes, I think you're weak. You always have been. Then why did you marry me? Because I thought you had potential. I thought I could make you into something better. But you're still the same pathetic man you were 8 years ago. Pathetic enough to outsmart you. You haven't outsmarted anyone. You've just delayed the inevitable. I'll contest the divorce. I'll fight for half of everything. And I'll make sure everyone in this town knows what kind of man you really are. Go ahead. I'm sure they'll be very interested to hear about your affair with your father-in-law. Elise stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. You think you've won, but you haven't. Your father and I will find another way to get what we want. And when we do, you'll wish you'd taken the easy way out. Is that a threat? It's a promise. I pulled out my phone and showed her the screen. I'd been recording our entire conversation. Thanks for the confession. I'm sure the police will find it very interesting. Elise's face went white. You bastard. No, Elise. I'm the man with stronger nerves. She turned and walked back to her car, but not before giving me one last look of pure hatred. I knew this wasn't over. Elise wasn't the type to give up easily, and neither was my father. The next morning, I called Steve and asked him to meet me at the store. I needed someone I could trust, and Steve had always been loyal. Jesus, Jack, he said after I told him everything. Your own father? That's messed up even by my standards. It gets worse. They're not going to give up. Elise threatened me last night, and I know my father well enough to know he'll try to find another angle. So what do you want to do? I want to end this permanently. I want them so destroyed that they'll never be able to hurt me or anyone else again. Steve was quiet for a moment. That's a dangerous road, Jack. Are you sure you want to go down it? They made the choice for me when they decided to betray me. All right, what do you need? Over the next few days, Steve and I prepared for war. We installed security cameras around my house and the store. We documented every attempt Elise made to contact me or access our joint accounts, and we waited for them to make their next move. We didn't have to wait long. On Friday evening, I was closing the store when 3 men I'd never seen before walked in. They were well-dressed, but had the look of men who were comfortable with violence. Jack Callahan, the tallest one, asked. That's me. We need to talk to you about a debt your father owes. I don't know anything about my father's debts. Maybe not, but you're going to help us collect it anyway. The man stepped closer, and I could see a gun bulge under his jacket. Your father borrowed money from our employer, a lot of money. Now he's disappeared, and we can't find him. That's not my problem. It is now. See, when people borrow money and then disappear, we go after their family. That's you. I felt a chill run down my spine. My father hadn't just been embezzling money from his clients. He'd been borrowing from loan sharks, probably to fund his new life with Elise. How much does he owe? 200,000, plus interest. Call it 250. I don't have that kind of money. But you will. We know about your trust fund. You're going to sign it over to us when you get access to it. And if I don't, the man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Then we'll start breaking things. First your store, then your house, then you. After they left, I called Tommy immediately. They're escalating, he said after I told him about the visit. Your father must be in serious trouble if he's borrowed money from people like that. Can you find him? I can try. But Jack, these people aren't going to wait 2 years for your trust fund. They'll want payment now. Then I guess I better find my father before they do. It took Tommy 3 days to track down my father. He was hiding in a cabin in New Hampshire, about 2 hours north of town. He'd been there for a week, ever since the FBI had started investigating his financial dealings. I drove up on a Sunday morning, taking back roads to avoid being followed. The cabin was isolated, surrounded by woods, with only one access road. Perfect for hiding, but also perfect for what I had planned. My father's car was parked outside, covered with a tarp. I knocked on the door and waited. Jack? He said when he opened the door. What are you doing here? We need to talk. He let me in reluctantly. The cabin was small and sparsely furnished, with the look of a place that was meant to be temporary. How did you find me? I hired a private investigator, the same one who found out about your affair with my wife. My father's face went pale. Jack, I can explain. No need. I know everything. The affair, the plan to steal my inheritance, the embezzlement, the loan sharks. You've been busy. It's not what you think. Really? Because I think you're a pathetic old man who decided to steal from his own son, rather than face the consequences of his own failures. My father sat down heavily in a chair by the window. I never meant for it to go this far, but it did, and now some very dangerous people are looking for you. They came to see me yesterday. What did they want? $250,000. They seem to think I'm responsible for your debts. I'm sorry, Jack. I never meant to involve you. Sorry doesn't help me when they're threatening to break my legs. We sat in silence for a moment. Then my father looked up at me with something like hope in his eyes. Maybe we can work together on this, pool our resources, find a way to pay them off. Work together, like you and Elise were working together to have me declared incompetent? That was her idea. I just went along with it. Bullshit. You were the one who suggested the psychiatrist, remember? I have it on tape. My father's shoulders sagged. What do you want from me, Jack? I want you to fix this mess. I want you to pay off the loan sharks, turn yourself in to the FBI, and disappear from my life forever. I can't pay them off. I don't have the money. Then you better find it, because if those men come after me again, I'm going to tell them exactly where you are. I stood to leave, but my father grabbed my arm. Jack, please, I'm your father. No, I said, pulling away from him. A father protects his son. A father doesn't try to steal from him. You're just a stranger who happens to share my DNA. I left him there in the cabin and drove home. I had one more move to make, and it was going to be the most satisfying of all. The next morning, I called Elise and asked her to meet me at our house. I told her I was ready to discuss terms for our divorce. She arrived an hour later, accompanied by a lawyer I didn't recognize. They both looked confident, like they thought they held all the cards. Jack, Elise said as they sat down at my kitchen table. I'm glad you've decided to be reasonable about this. I've always been reasonable, Elise. It's one of my weaknesses. This is my attorney, Richard Vance, she continued. He's prepared a settlement agreement that we think is fair to both parties. Vance slid a document across the table. I glanced at it briefly. Elise was asking for half of everything, including half of my inheritance when I received it. This is interesting, I said. But I have a counter-proposal. 9. I pulled out a folder and placed it on the table. Inside were copies of all the evidence I'd gathered, the hotel receipts, the recordings, the financial documents, and photos of Elise and my father together. What is this? Vance asked. Evidence of adultery, conspiracy to commit fraud, and embezzlement. I thought you should see what you're dealing with before we proceed. Vance examined the documents while Elise sat in silence. His confident expression gradually changed to one of concern. Mrs. Callahan, he said finally, we need to talk privately. Whatever you have to say, you can say in front of Jack. 9. I don't think that's wise. Say it. Vance looked uncomfortable. Based on these documents, you have no grounds for a settlement claim. In fact, you could be facing criminal charges. Those documents are illegally obtained. They can't be used in court. Some of them, maybe, but the hotel receipts are public records. The financial documents were obtained legally through discovery, and the recordings, well, you admitted to the affair in front of witnesses. 9. Elise turned to me with fury in her eyes. What witnesses? Ninika, for one. She's been very cooperative since she got fired. Amazing how quickly people turn when their own interests are threatened. Ninika wouldn't testify against me. She already has. Signed affidavit, detailing the entire conspiracy. She's hoping it will help her avoid criminal charges. Vance stood up and gathered his papers. Mrs. Callahan, I can't represent you in this matter. There are too many potential conflicts of interest. After he left, Elise and I sat alone in the kitchen, where we'd shared breakfast for 8 years. So what happens now? She asked. Now you sign a document agreeing to an uncontested divorce with no financial settlement. You keep whatever assets are solely in your name, and I keep everything else. And if I don't, then I release everything to the media. Your affair with your father-in-law will be front-page news in the local paper. Your law practice will be destroyed, and you'll probably face criminal charges. You wouldn't. Try me. Elise stared at me for a long moment. You've changed, Jack. You're not the man I married. No, I'm the man you made me. Congratulations. She signed the papers. 2 days later, the FBI arrested my father at the cabin in New Hampshire. The loan sharks, faced with the choice between collecting from a man in federal prison or writing off the debt, chose to move on to more profitable ventures. Monica Lane was disbarred and fled town in disgrace. Elise lost most of her clients, and was forced to close her law practice. She moved back in with her parents in Boston, a 40-year-old woman living in her childhood bedroom. As for me, I kept running my hardware store and waited for my 40th birthday. When that day came, I would have access to nearly $2 million, money that would have been stolen from me if I hadn't found the strength to fight back. Steve stopped by the store on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, a few weeks after everything was settled. "So how does it feel?" he asked. "Getting your revenge and all?" "Satisfying," I said. "More satisfying than I expected." "Any regrets?" I thought about that for a moment. Did I regret destroying my marriage, my relationship with my father, and the lives of two women I'd once cared about? "No," I said finally. "They made their choices. I just made sure they faced the consequences. Now I rebuild. New life, new relationships, new everything. But this time, I'll know what to look for." Steve nodded and headed for the door. "Just remember, Jack, the strongest nerves aren't always the ones that win. Sometimes they're just the ones that survive." After he left, I stood alone in my store, surrounded by the tools and supplies that honest people use to build and fix things. Outside, the sun was setting over the harbor, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. Elise had said she wanted someone with stronger nerves. She'd found him, all right. She just hadn't expected him to be her own husband. I locked up the store and walked home through the quiet streets of the town where I'd been born and raised. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and maybe even new relationships built on trust instead of betrayal. But tonight, I was content to be exactly what I'd always been: Jack Callahan, the quiet man who ran the hardware store, the man everyone underestimated, the man with the strongest nerves of all.